Okay, number one, when should we be able to vote, drive, drink, get married, and why?
I think that like 18 years old is a sufficient age to vote, simply because that's when I feel like you're at the peak of your maturity. And in regards to driving, I think that 16 would be applicable, simply because I feel like at times teenagers need to be at certain places at certain times, but don't have the means other than driving themselves. So I feel like that would be the ideal age for me. Drink. Um, I would say 21. Like I know that it is contradicting by saying that you are able to vote but not drink. But I feel like here, specifically in the United States, I feel like if we lower the drinking age to 18, it would give teenagers um, I guess, the leeway to go out and drink more, and then we would see like more accidents in regards to uh, like alcohol poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
And then in regards to get married, I think that the standard should be 18, simply because again that's when I feel like you're most mature and pretty much leaving teenage years, even though like yeah, I feel like that's when you're most mature,
Okay.
or at least like at your peak of maturity.
Okay. And for number two, what are your thoughts about teenagers having sex?
Um, Personally, I feel like teenagers should wait until they believe they have met the right person, or like I feel like teenagers nowadays don't really think of the consequences, or they perhaps think that it's like a cool thing, I guess, lack of a better term, to have sex early. And I feel like that's where we see like the epidemic with STDs. And so I feel like teenagers should um, wait until they feel old enough to do so. But I guess if they do decide to take the decision, I feel like they should take the proper precautions um, to have sex.
Okay. What are your thoughts on birth control for teenagers and what age?
I think teenagers should be allowed to have birth control. I feel like that is an extra precaution in regards to avoiding pregnancy. And I also feel like I think that certain females do take birth controls, but it's to control their hormones, not necessarily to avoid pregnancy. So I feel like that's also a reason for why teenagers should be allowed to take birth control. And in regards to what age, I feel like honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I would say around like 17 or 18 if it's just to avoid pregnancy. But if it's like for other health reasons, then I guess it just depends on the case.
Okay. Number four, what does virginity mean to you?
I think virginity, obviously, like it's I feel like virginity means to me like it's like a sense of purity. Like I feel like if you're a virgin, you obviously haven't had any sexual encounters. So I feel like I see that as like being pure and almost innocent in a way. And but that shouldn't be taken as a bad thing. I feel like with virginity comes this sense of innocence and purity that honestly I um, would consider something. Wait, like I would consider. I think highly about.
Yeah.
I think highly about it. I think it's just like that innocence that you haven't had your first sexual encounter, and of course, like eventually you will. But I feel like the longer you wait and you hold this innocence with you, I think the better.
Okay. What are your thoughts on sex education?
I think that sex education is very important simply because nowadays teenagers are deciding to pursue sexual activities. So I feel like by educating teenagers to take the proper precautions before they decide to have sex um, is very important, simply because it just avoids unnecessary consequences, or consequences that could have been, that it avoids consequences that may have a large impact later in life, such as STDs or pregnancy, like unnecessary pregnancy and stuff. So I feel like sex education should be taken seriously in schools and at home.
Okay, and how would you design a sex education course?
Ooh,
Would you make it, like, for example, would you make it abstinence only, or you just would you more focus on like understanding or and more protection?
I would say understanding and protection, simply because I feel like it hasn't worked out. By like teaching abstinence hasn't worked out, um, as we have seen in today's age. So I feel like by teaching protection, um, you avoid certain situations and certain problems, as I previously stated, as opposed to teaching them not to have it at all.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on teen sexting?
Um, by sexting, do you mean sending explicit photos, or like just like messages?
Both.
Um, Honestly, I don't think I don't think teens should do it. I think it's very um I want to say risky, just for lack of a better term, but I think that teenagers who expose themselves in those type of situations should consider the fact that, well, one, they may not be with the person who they are sexting later in life, and those photos may be used against you, and that probably leads to body shaming and bullying. And
Number one, when should we be able to vote, drive, drink, get married, and why?
I think we should be able to vote at the age of 18, the current age now. Drive, I would say 18 sounds about right as well. Drink, I say 21. And get married, I would say 25. Voting, I think at that point, kids are already, educated in school, so they'll already know the importance of voting. Driving, you're at that age, I would think you're responsible enough to drive and maneuver on the road. Drinking, um, again, at a responsibility age where you're responsible. And getting married, I chose 25 because it's an age where you can kind of know that you can know whether or not it's going to be for the long haul. When you're younger, there's there are so many different factors that um, kind of come into play of whether or not you'd be ready enough or ready to be married.
Great. Question number two, what are your thoughts about teenagers having sex?
I am opposed to it. I think that at an early age, there's just a lot of curiosity as opposed to education on sex. So there's a lot of influence also around, such as TV and social media and things of that sort, where teenagers feel pressured. But um, I'm personally opposed to it.
Okay. Number three, what are your thoughts on birth control for teenagers and what age?
Well, I understand the thought process behind birth control for teenagers, and I understand that more and more teenagers are having sex at an earlier age. Um, but I don't necessarily agree with the birth control for teenagers because I feel they should practice abstinence um, anyway. So If a teenager were to be given birth control, I would say 16 would be the age.
Okay. And what does virginity mean to you?
Well, virginity means a where you're just pure, and there's a sense of innocence. So, yeah.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on sex education?
Sex education, I think, is very important, especially for younger people that are in school and they are completely oblivious to, sexually transmitted diseases and the difference between having sex and being in love and things of that sort. So I do promote, I'm an advocate for sex education in schools.
So for number 6, how would you design a sex education course?
I would probably start off by creating more of like skits and different scenarios where people are actually acting it out, and that would be part of the course as opposed to the textbook and things like that, because a lot of the time we will learn and kind of get it through our minds if it's very interesting, if you actually act it out and show a real life scenario as opposed to just reading it in a book, because sometimes just watching it visually, actually taking place, it will kind of stick in the mind a little bit better.
For number 7, what are your thoughts on teen sexting?
I would be opposed to that as well, because I understand the aspect behind it where a teenager would be curious and, think that it's okay to do that. But again, there's a lack of knowledge, and it really also goes back to self-respect and things of that sort. So I don't think that a teenager sexting is appropriate.
Right. When should we be able to vote, drive, drink, and get married, and why?
Well, for me, each one of these things could be at a different age. I don't necessarily think it's all the same age. Vote, I think people can vote at 18 like they do now. I think teenagers have formed opinions, have formed thoughts, not all of them, but I don't think the maturity and the knowledge between 18 to 20 or 21 is going to change a whole lot. Most kids by 18 have had a little bit of college experience if they choose to go to college, or work experience, so they have a little bit of a taste of what the world is.
Driving?
Driving, very different. I think I think driving should be at 19 unless they need to for a hardship license. I think that's a good thing. I had my hardship license when I was 13 in Texas, so I could drive and work. But it was limited. I was limited as to where I could go at that age. It wasn't until I was 16 that I could do the full, go where I wanted, when I wanted, at what time I wanted. Couldn't drive after dark unless I was coming home from work or home from school. And I think it's a good thing, because at the point that you get behind a wheel, and I think drinking is the same. At the time that you get behind a wheel, or any kind of alcohol is involved, you're possibly endangering others around you. It will always have consequences to those around you, whether it just be family having to deal with whatever the situation might be if you've caused issues. I don't think people are mature enough or have a full understanding of the consequences. any younger than age 25 for drinking.
Drinking and
Yeah.
then marriage.
Marriage, I think it's kind of taking care of itself now. I'm seeing society, people are just naturally waiting and getting married and having kids at an older age, as far as what they have planned for their life. Obviously, there's some, situations where things are not planned and you have to make your decisions when that comes to it. But that goes right back to in my opinion, the maturity level. But I think people are planning to have families later in life and get married later in life. And I think it's kind of a good thing because, again, you change. From the time you're 16 to the time you're 21, you change a lot. From the time you're 21 to the time you're 30, you change a lot. I think 30, unless you have any kind of major life changes or tragedies, you don't really change a whole lot. You grow, yes, but I don't think your opinions, your thoughts, and your outlook on life completely goes in a different direction. So I think 25 would be a good age for marriage, yeah. But I think people are naturally doing it later.
What are your thoughts about teenagers having sex?
They're gonna do it. And the more taboo you make it, the more they want to do it. Teenagers, I was a rebellious teenager. I rebelled in different ways, but as soon as you tell a teenager they can't do something, if the rebellious nature or just the natural curiosity, they're going to want to do it more. I think if you have conversations with them and educate them and try to make them understand the consequences, it helps. Sticking our head in the sand and trying to ignore it and hope if we pretend, make it go away, it will. That it hasn't worked for my 54 years. I don't think it's going to work for the next 50. It's going to happen. Nobody likes it. I don't think it's wise, but I just don't see a way to stop it. So to me, educate them.
What are your thoughts on birth control for teenagers, and what age you think, what age do you think would be okay for a teenager to take birth control pills?
I don't think it should be the teenager's sole decision. I think the parents, it should not be that a teenager can just walk into the doctor's office and get birth control. I think the parents should always be involved and be aware of it. And it varies. I don't think there's a set age. Again, it goes to the maturity level. And at that age, when teenagers are starting to, discover and get curious and, start thinking about sex, thinking about the opposite sex or the same sex, whatever it may be, the maturity level just isn't there. It's just not possible for them to get, have a full understanding. So I don't think there's one set age. I think it's, parents and children need to make that together. I think parents are sometimes just as much of the problem.
Yeah.
In regards to that, they don't. They go to extremes. They either, again, try to ignore it and pretend it's not there. It'll go away. Don't talk about it, or in some cases they're a little bit too free about it, and they make the teenager feel that whatever they do is fine. There does have to be some boundaries, I think, but it depends on the child.
Okay. What does virginity mean to you? Like, what is virginity?
That's a tough one.
Like, for instance, do you think, because some people feel that, how can I say that, it has to be like penetration in the vaginal area, or is it just stimulation, period?
To me, it's kind of stimulation, period, because we're not talking about, again, we're not just talking about the consequences of, how you feel after, or the chance of getting pregnant, or any type of, sexually transmitted disease. There's so much more emotional, that goes with, whether it's, you want to call it heavy petting, making out, whatever you want to call it. There's just so much emotional baggage that comes with that society puts on it. You know, when you're in school, you can be a slut, and it's got its own connotations, and the consequences of that. You know, somebody being labeled a slut because they've kissed on the first date, whatever it might be. It means something different to everybody. It could be something completely innocent, and somebody gets labeled as that. I think those consequences that follow you on that, it's demeaning on your maturity level, your confidence level, just how you feel about yourself changes when you get labeled as something. Mm-hmm. And I think that I don't think it has to be penetration. I think it can be anything, because again, it changes how you look at yourself at the end of it. Mm-hmm. You know, if somebody just dates a lot, and it might not even be any kind of anything remotely considered sexual contact, but you date a lot of different people, you can be labeled as something then too. Mm-hmm. And it has its negative effects.
So it's like basically it's just like a label.
It's just a label. I mean, and it's what comes with it. Mm-hmm. It's what society, it's what people, it's what you think about yourself. So I don't think it's so much just the act of sex or the consequences of sex that people need to worry about. So to me, virginity is something in your own mind and how you look at yourself.
Okay. What are your thoughts on sex education?
It's a necessity. It's an absolute mm-hmm. necessity. Kids aren't going to not have sex. They're not going to stop talking about sex because we stop talking to them about it and don't talk to them about it. They're not going to stop being curious. They're not going to stop wanting to do it. When you're a teenager, you want to grow up fast. When you're an adult, you wish you hadn't. But there's just no way our adult selves could ever get our teen self to believe that or understand that. Mm-hmm. I think we just need to educate them as much as we can and mm-hmm. hope that they take it, hope that they listen.
But if for sexual education, how will you design the program?
I don't think anything can be hidden. I think mm-hmm. that kids at that age, in my opinion, I look at what's being taught in school now, not even just from a sex education point, but just from anything under math, English, history, any kind of subjects being taught in school now. What kids are learning now in grade school is stuff that I might have learned in junior high or high school, and that's just going to continue further. So the knowledge we want them to glean and take in is increasing. But again, society has done nothing to increase the maturity level that goes along with it. And I think that there's detriments for that when you give somebody a lot of education but not the means to handle it. You give them a lot of knowledge but not the understanding. And it's two different things. You can have knowledge but not understanding. Mm-hmm. And when you give somebody all the knowledge but not the tools to understand it, you're doing harm. So we need to give them the tools to understand it. We need to be very forthcoming about it, and we need to remove all the labels. You can't say if you're promiscuous, you're this. If you don't, you do this. If you have to be completely a blank slate and teach them everything about it, everything. And I think along with that, it's not just the act of sex. They need to be taught society's views mm-hmm. and the impacts it could have on them later in life.
Okay. What are your thoughts about teen sexting?
I hate it. It's ridiculous. It's just to me, there's some things that should be hidden and mm-hmm. kept private, and once you put anything electronically, it's not. And again, it all comes back to the consequences and people not understanding it. And that's not just kids, that's adults. That's not just younger generations, that's older generations. Until you have the means to protect yourself or the personality to have confidence in yourself, anytime you do anything like that, you're taking a chance on it being out there, and it does not come back. It does not come back. And the same thing goes with Facebook, just every little thing. I look back when I was younger, and there was a lot of stuff I did that I would not have wanted to be posting on Facebook. And you don't know what your friends are posting, you don't know what they're writing, and it goes out to everybody, and it has long reaching consequences. Late in life, it can have consequences. Sexting, it's just, it's not private. You think it's private between you and somebody else, and it's not. Once it's anything electronic, it is not private. It's definitely a bad thing. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. If you're going to do it, pick up the phone.
The government can be recording you.
Well, that's true too. That's true too. But, you're sending anything out like that, and you're handing over to somebody else all the power. And if you're handing it over to somebody that's going to take it and abuse it and misuse it, there's nothing you can do to change that.
Hello, my name is Vanessa Stewart, and here are my final thoughts. For number one, when should we be able to vote, drink, drive, and get married, and why? All the participants agreed with the ages to vote, and everything were appropriate. And they also believed each age had enough maturity and experience to take on those responsibilities. For number two, what are your thoughts about teenagers having sex? They all agreed that teenage sex isn't acceptable because they aren't mature enough to understand the consequences of it. Because of course, they can catch STDs and get pregnant, and there's other consequences as well. And they all believe that sex education should be taught to teenagers so they have more of understanding. All three of them agreed that the sex education program or course should touch on the topics of more biological and psychological. But Natasha was more of, yes, teach it that way, but still teach abstinence, abstinence, and that's important. For question number 3. What are your thoughts on birth control for teenagers and what age? Alexis and Cheryl approved both birth control so that teenage girls can protect themselves. And they believe, and all three of them believe that Natasha and Alexis and Cheryl all believe that they're still going to do it anyway, and either way, but Natasha disagreed about teens taking birth control, but Natasha and Alexis discussed that if it's for medical reasons, it is acceptable for them to take birth control. For number 4, what does virginity mean? They all believe it was a sense of innocence and not engaging in any sexual behavior. We already discussed number 5 and number 6 together. And what are your thoughts on teen sexting? All participants disagreed about teen sexting. They're more worried about the consequences about it later, and because it will appear, it can potentially appear on social media, and it'll always be on the internet forever. And if you break up with an ex, they can still have those images even though you guys are not together, and they might not even share them. Somebody else could see them, but it won't be posted on the internet. And this goes on to the topic of revenge porn. From all these interviews, I found that the younger and older generation was more older and open. So Alexis, he's 19, he was more open, and Cheryl, while Natasha, who is 39, she had more conservative views. And my hypothesis is that the reason why Alexis was still, Alexis and Cheryl were more liberal. Well, first of all, Alexis, he's still 19 and he's still young and he's still having new experiences. So he's still taking it in and still understanding it. While Cheryl, she already had those experiences. She already processed those actions during her youth, and because she went through those things and like has more of an understanding and wisdom because of life, she understands why people do those behaviors and accept it. While Natasha, she's in her she's 39, so she already went through those experience, and now she's at a time in her life where where she understands it. But it might not be that at all, but I still think that maybe like 10 years from now, her views will change and would be more open-minded about it because she'll have more of an understanding of her experience through age. All right. Thank you so much for listening.